out with, I just want to confirm that everyone can see my screen okay right now, or if anyone's having any difficulty seeing it. I've tried to size the window appropriately so that hopefully most people won't have to do a lot of scrolling or have any difficulty seeing what I'm doing. If you do have any issues right off the bat, please let me know now. Okay, so the topics that we're covering today are to do with our 3 classification systems that we use in the Community Information Module in CIOC. That would be the Errors Info Line Taxonomy, or 2-in-1 Taxonomy, the Inform Ontario Thesaurus, and the North American Industry Classification System, otherwise known as NAICS. I'm going to cover them in the order I just mentioned, so Taxonomy, Thesaurus, and NAICS. Because that way people who are completely uninterested in some of the later ones can drop off, since most people will be interested in the taxonomy. Some people will be interested in the thesaurus, and fewer people will be interested in NAICS. I've done them in that order so that if you want to leave at the end of the session, you can, but do keep in mind that I will have an open question at the session at the end of the presentation, so if you leave, you will miss your opportunity to do that. I will also give you an opportunity at the end of each section that I'm going through to ask any particular questions you have about any of the classification systems we're going to discuss today. The majority of the time will be spent on the taxonomy because that is both the most complicated system and the one that is used by the majority of the membership. I'll start out by talking a bit about the basics of what each system is for and how it's used, its history in CIOC, and then I'll cover each one in detail. In particular, how to search using the system, the types of fields that we have available for display in your records, how to index using the system, and how to do term management, so actually manage the classification system itself. So I'll be covering those for each of the 3 systems, and as I say, the majority of the time will be spent on the taxonomy today. Does anyone have any questions off the bat about the topics that we're covering today? Is anyone actually having difficulty seeing the window here that I will be working in? I can make it smaller if need be, but the bigger I can make it, the more I can show you and the more easy it will be to see what I'm demonstrating. So I'm hesitant to make it smaller unless someone is having severe difficulty. Okay. Susan is saying she can't see the whole screen. Is it just slightly cut off or severely cut off? If it's severely cut off, there's nothing I can do for you. If it's just slightly cut off, I can make the window a little bit smaller. All you care about is this window here. Please don't, the browser window, please don't worry about if the rest of the screen is cut off.
If they resize the window, they'll be able to, it'll zoom it for them. You resize the display window. If you resize the display window, it will zoom it so that it fits on your screen.
Okay, so I should just maximize? Or will that be too small?
I don't know. The only reason you're concerned about showing the whole thing is because of the pop-ups. So as long as you show the pop-ups, you just have to remember.
That work better? Okay, well, this is the way we'll do it. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking a bit about each of the 3 systems and what they're used for. The majority of you, if not all of you, will have some experience with the taxonomy at this point. The taxonomy is the most complex classification system that we use in CIOC, and we have had the taxonomy in CIOC for about 3 years now. We've only recently had the French system available, so that is a little bit more recent that we've had the French information, and that information is not yet complete in that we don't have all of the descriptions available for all of the terms, and there is still some continuing and ongoing work being done to complete the French taxonomy. But we do have the basic term name translations done, and a lot of the use reference information is also in place at this point. The taxonomy system is maintained by Infoline, which is a Los Angeles organization. They also have their own community information service, and they produce and maintain the taxonomy for all of the U.S. and now at least work with the editors in Canada to maintain the Canadian version of the taxonomy as well. The Inform Ontario Thesaurus is the traditional classification system that we've had in CIOC since it was first created. The version that we use now was based on the copy of the Inform Ontario Thesaurus that Hamilton had and was modified and updated at the time of our last redevelopment 5 years ago. So the version that is distributed to everyone who gets a new membership in CIOC and wants to use the thesaurus is still based on that version that we assembled 5 years ago. We did do some polish and correction at that time, and for about 6 months to a year afterward, we incorporated a number of changes and fixes to both the English and the French version of the thesaurus. But since that time, we really have not done any ongoing updates to the thesaurus, and there really isn't a plan to continue to do updates to the thesaurus because the focus has really turned to the use of the taxonomy. Unlike the taxonomy, which is a very detailed system with thousands and thousands of terms, the Inform Ontario Thesaurus is a more general classification system. It doesn't aim to be very specific, rather it's general terms, and it only consists of a few thousand terms, many of which are what we call unused terms, meaning they're the equivalent of the taxonomy's use references. So in scale, it's a much smaller system. It's a much more general system. It was based on the needs of Ontario, so it does have that going for it. It really it began as a Canadian system and didn't need to be Canadianized in the way that the taxonomy did. So although there has been an extensive amount of work done to Canadianize the taxonomy, that was originally a U.S. system, whereas the thesaurus was originally a Canadian and specifically Ontario system. And finally, we have the North American Industry Classification System. It has quite a lot in common with the Infoline taxonomy in that it has the same kind of hierarchical structure and the same kind of very specific classification. The major difference between the two is that the North American Industry Classification System aims to use as few classifications as possible per service or business or organization. So where possible, you would index every record to only one classification using the North American Industry Classification System. That's a very, very different approach than what is taken with either of the other kinds of classification systems. So that does make the process of using and indexing with NAICS quite a lot simpler than what you have to do to use either the thesaurus or the taxonomy. NAICS is going to be the least frequently used system because it does focus primarily on classifying organizations based on their industry, and that often means business. So NAICS is although it is primarily focused on businesses and industry, it does have classifications to cover pretty much any kind of record that you could imagine. It is a very broad system that does aim to cover all sectors. And so that does include most of the human resources or human services information that you would have in your database, and not just the businesses. However, it is a system that would be primarily of interest to any member who does keep some business information in their database. One of the history of NAICS is that it is currently maintained by government agencies in Mexico, the United States, and Canada. It is a joint project between those three countries, and each one produces their own version of the systems. So in the same way that we have the Canadian taxonomy, there is a Canadian version of NAICS that they all share a common core of how to organize the information. However, the terminology used and the particular industries and organization types that are available for classification vary from one country to another. So, and this is CIOC has a blanket license to offer the system in our software. There are particular links to Statistics Canada and to the official version available whenever you're using the system, and that was the condition on which we were given permission directly from Statistics Canada to offer this system to our members. So anyone who wants to use it simply needs to ask for it. There are no ongoing license fees that have to be paid in order to use the system, which differs from both the thesaurus and the taxonomy, where those are licensed products that generally require a membership fee or a licensing fee to maintain your ability to use and publish that information. Does anyone have any initial questions about those three systems? What they're used for or anything like that? Okay. So I'm going to start off getting into detail with the taxonomy, and this will take quite a while. The taxonomy is quite a complex system, and both the searching and the indexing do require quite a lot more effort than either of the other two systems. One thing I do want to point out is I cannot give you advice on particular terms or particular data management practices other than within the context of the technology. So while I will do everything I can to give you advice on ways to accurately maintain your information and find, not errors, but find inconsistencies in your data management practice and your indexing practice, and give you as many tips as I can based on what the software can do for you. I cannot give you any advice on the particular terminology that you should be using, the particular terms, the particular subjects. That really is a local practice, and also there are support bulletin boards and communities specifically available to you for figuring out your content. Okay, so just to make sure that that's really clear right up front, that isn't the kind of information that I can give you in this session. But what I can help you do is use the tools available to you as effectively as possible and make sure that you understand all of the features that are available to you and why you would want to use them. Okay, so we'll start from the very beginning, which is our most basic taxonomy search. This is the search that is available if you make your taxonomy available to the public, and it's called Browse by Service Category. Browse by Service Category simply lists one particular level of the taxonomy and allows you to drill down to lower levels of the taxonomy. They may or may not have a description available at each level. That's part of your setup, which I will explain later. They may or may not have an icon beside the title. None of these do, but it is possible to have an icon of your choosing beside the particular category to try and assist the public or make it clear what the particular topics are about at a glance. And you only see branches of the taxonomy that have records associated with them. This is a license restriction of the taxonomy where you cannot show terms to the public that are not directly necessary for the purpose of searching or indexing or to show records that are indexed to those terms. So you cannot show any unused or inactivated terms to the public unless you need them, for instance, for the purpose of drilling down to a lower level where you are using a specific term in a specific record. All right, this is part of what you agree to when you use the taxonomy, and there are a number of other parts of your license agreement when you pay for your ongoing license to use the taxonomy, and wherever we can, the software is making sure that you meet those license agreements. So that may be by adding disclaimers or information about the taxonomy to the public. So if I'm viewing this from the public, it would show a particular disclaimer pointing to the 2-on-1 taxonomy site and indicating that this information is the copyright of the 2-on-1 taxonomy site and info line and so on. So the software is taking care of those particular things that you have agreed to when you signed up for your license to use the taxonomy. So you do not need to worry about that. Whenever the taxonomy information is shown to the public, the software is taking care of those particular licensing issues for you. The drill down works by clicking subtopics. And by the way, I am using the Hamilton site today for all of our searching demonstration. I will be doing the management portion in my own site, but because Hamilton has a large number of records that are indexed in all three systems, they have very graciously allowed us to use their site for demonstration purposes today. So within Basic Needs, I clicked on the subtopics, and it brought up a number of the next level down in the hierarchy of the taxonomy under Basic Needs, where I see food, housing, shelter, and so on. I can proceed down to more subtopics, so more narrowly defined terms. I can view a list of related topics, if that's applicable, where two terms have been designated as related to each other, and keeping in mind that these links only appear if we have related topics for which we have records indexed. Because again, there is the restriction on this publicly available search where we don't show terms that are not indexed to records. So you would not see a link to related topics if there were not records associated with those terms. And we have the ability, once we get past the first level, to view programs and services for any particular topic. The program and services search within the public search is always a generous search, searching not only the current level, but any levels below. So if I search for food, I'm not only going to bring up any terms that are actually indexed to food, but also any of the subtopics within food that have records associated with them. If I click on subtopics, we'll break it down further, and you'll see that here our 116 is made up of records that were emergency food, food collection programs, food cleaning programs. All of these together would make up my search for food using this search. From this screen, I can go back up. I can search for food. So this would execute a search. Whenever you see the number in brackets, that's telling you that clicking on this link is going to perform a search, and that search will return the number of records indicated in the bracket. I can also move up a level by going back to Basic Needs, which is going to show me all the subtopics of Basic Needs, including food. That allows me to move up and down within the hierarchy. If I choose to view related topics, It's going to show me all of the topics that have been designated as related to emergency food, which I have selected. In this case, you'll see there are no descriptions printed. That's because in this setup of that level of the taxonomy, it has been designated to not show descriptions at that fine level of detail of the taxonomy. Again, I could do related topics for any of these items, or I could perform a search. In this case, there are no subtopics for homeless meals because I'm at such a low level of the taxonomy. So my option that I'm going to choose is to actually execute a search for Christmas baskets. You'll see it's 11 records, which is exactly the number that it had indicated. I have some further search options available to me as part of my search of doing a basic taxonomy search. I can go back to view all the subtopics of Christmas baskets if there are any. I can view topics related to Christmas baskets. I can expand my search to Christmas programs, which is the parent term of Christmas baskets. And I can view all the subtopics of Christmas programs, which would be all of the sibling terms of Christmas baskets, meaning this is going to show me all of the subtopics of Christmas programs. So that would include Christmas baskets as well as any other terms at the same level of the taxonomy hierarchy as Christmas baskets. Because I am logged in as a staff member, I get one additional option, and that is restrict. Okay, this restrict is not available to the public with a basic taxonomy search, or browse by service category search, but it is available to me as a staff member. What restrict does is it takes that generous search where I said it would search all of the subtopics, and it does a restricted search, which is only going to match exact terms rather than the term and all of its subtopics. If I want to expand my search to Christmas programs, for example, I have 24 records, but we know that a number of those are specifically Christmas baskets and not Christmas programs. So if I do restrict, I would expect to have fewer than 24, and indeed I have none. And that is because there are no records indexed at Christmas programs, only the subtopics of Christmas programs. So if I do view subtopics of Christmas programs, I can see that my 24 is actually comprised of Christmas baskets, clearing bureaus, festivals, light displays, all of these subtopics of Christmas programs. Okay, does anyone have any further questions about how basic search works? Okay, it is a very basic search. I'm going to take you into one of the records just to show you that. Pardon me, I'm in. Not sure where Hamilton Key there, but that's on. That is there, right here you'll see that there are two fields displaying taxonomy information. And I'll discuss the details of those fields later, but the bottom line is that one of those fields executes that browse by search that we just did. And if I go into it and go back to Christmas baskets here, you'll see that it did the same 11 record search for Christmas baskets within the browse by with all the same browse by options that we saw earlier. Okay, so there is one version of the taxonomy field that you can add to the details version, the details page of your records that would execute this basic taxonomy search. Okay, and it'll be important to note that you do have another version of the taxonomy field that executes a different kind of search. So if I do that, that's this one here. If I do that search, you'll see I have a completely different interface here of further search options than what I had before when I had executed a link that did a browse by service category search. Okay, so that is going to be something really important to understand, especially when you are starting to add the public ability to do taxonomy searches. Since the public only has access to the Browse by Service Category search, it's important that the version of the taxonomy field that you display to them is the version that does the Browse by Service Category search. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the other kind of publicly available service category search, and that is our basic keyword search from the front page. If you select service categories from the keyword search on either the advanced search or the basic search page, that will do a keyword search within only the information that we can gather from the index terms, the index taxonomy terms for that record. It includes not just the direct terms that you have indexed, but also parent and child terms and any rolled up terms and use references that you may have associated with that term. So if I had food banks and there was another a use reference for food banks called food pantries, it would automatically behind the scenes be searching both of those versions of the terms that I had added to the record, okay? And that's similar to what you'll see later on with the thesaurus.
I'm getting reports of not being able to hear.
We're having volume problems, are we? I can try and speak up. Is anyone else getting no sound?
Yeah.
Okay, it seems to be just Deborah, so Chris will try and work that out with Deborah, and I'm going to continue on. All right, so those are the two searches that are available to the public when using the taxonomy. Those are the only things that we have available to the public. There is no equivalent to, say, the subject sidebar that we'll look at when we do this thesaurus, and there's no equivalent to the subject finder, which we'll also look at when we do the thesaurus and the NAICS system. As a staff member, I have access to two additional kinds of searches, the basic taxonomy search and the advanced taxonomy search. The advanced search is based on the basic search, so we'll start there and just discuss all the different principles of the different kinds of searches that are available. And then we'll show you how to construct a more complex search using the advanced tool. The basic taxonomy search gives you access to a keyword search, a search by code, a drill down search, which is a hierarchical search, and a related concept search. You might have some additional options available to you depending on whether or not you're a super user. And everything that I demonstrate today is based on my permissions as a super user. So if you don't see similar options available to you, that's likely because you don't have the permissions if you're not a super user. The basic taxonomy search is also the utility that we use to do taxonomy management. So when I cover that at the end of the taxonomy topic, I will go through how we use this tool to do taxonomy classification system management. So that's managing the taxonomy itself. The keyword search will search either the name or the name and description of the particular taxonomy term. That includes use references, which are alternate forms of the same term, such as the one I gave earlier of food pantries instead of food banks. That's probably not a good example, but basically an alternate form of the same term. In this case, I'm going to do a search for newborn, and I'm actually going to search newborn star, which would search both newborns and newborn, and I'm going to search in name only. Here I got 3 examples of things that had either newborn or newborns in the name. If I expand my search to anywhere and do the same search, you'll see that I get significantly more matches, and that is because that would allow us to search within the description and many other fields within that record. So it could be, that one I couldn't tell you. It would be alternate descriptions. It would be alternate names. It's quite a broad search, so you will get significantly different results. In addition, if I search name and go into administrative mode, this isn't a good example. Better example. I'll go out of admin mode for a second here. I'll do food. I get 48 matches. If I go into administrative mode, I get 166 matches, and that is because a number of the terms are inactive. You'll see them red here, meaning that they cannot be used to index records. When I'm in administrative mode, I automatically see any records that have been inactivated. If you do not have the permissions to be in administrative mode, what you would see instead is show inactive. It would do the same thing. It would show you any terms that have been inactivated. By default, all inactive terms are going to be hidden unless you require them in order to do some other kind of display, such as the drill down search, where even though basic needs is inactivated so that I can't add it to a record, I need to be able to see basic needs and food and emergency food in order to get down to food lines, which is a green and active term that could be added to a record. Okay? So that is the only condition under which you see inactivated terms unless you are in administrative or inactive term mode. Whenever your mode has changed, you will see this yellow box around it to indicate to you that a setting has been turned on. It will show you not just which search you're in, such as drill down, that's what I'm in right now, but also if you change your mode, such as terms with records and admin mode are the two settings here, it will highlight to you that you have a setting turned on. In this case, it says normal mode, but that means if you click it, it would put you back into normal mode. The yellow box is highlighting to you that right now you are not in normal mode, you are in administrative mode. So it is a little bit of a reversal. It says admin mode, but I'm not in admin mode. If I turn it on, I'm in administrative mode, and it says normal mode because if I click on normal mode, it would turn it back into normal mode. The yellow box that highlights to you that you have changed your setting. The same would hold true for terms with records. If I turn on terms with records, it says show all terms, but that means that if I click on that link, it will show all terms. The yellow box is highlighting to me that right now I am not showing all terms, I'm only showing terms with records. So if I go down that food branch that I saw before, I no longer see a number of the inactivated terms, or sorry, not inactivated, the unused terms that were under the emergency food branch. I'll turn off terms with records, and we'll do that branch again. And you'll see that food lines has reappeared and sack lunches dinners has reappeared because even though those terms are not being used for records, they are active terms. They can be used for records. So they will by default appear in my list unless I change my mode to show only terms with records. Okay. So I'll go to the code search now. If you know the code or the branch of the code that you want to search in, such as DD would give me food, then you can search using that method. I'll show, in this case, I'll do administrative mode so I can see the whole branch, starting with food. In general, you will not be searching by code, but rather you can end up in a code-based search because of other activities that you do. And I'll give you an example now. If I go into food banks and I click food banks, it opens up a little window that gives me all the detailed information about that term. It gives me the description, the broader term, so the parent term within the hierarchy, any subtopics of that term, the related topics and related concepts and so on. If I click on any of these terms, it's going to perform a code search on those terms. So that's how you'll most often end up in a code search, not because you're directly typing in the code, but rather you're doing some other type of search, and it leads you to view a term that the software automatically finds based on the code of the term. One of the things you'll notice here is I'm in administrative mode right now. It's showing me all of these inactivated terms within my my more information window here. It is making them red to show that they're inactivated. But you'll notice that if I do the same search here with administrative mode turned off, I still see emergency food as the broader term because it's required in order to show the hierarchy, but I no longer see any of those inactivated subtopics. So it goes right from broader term to related topics and does not even show that there were those subtopics that had been inactivated. Okay? Related concepts. There are a number of large, broad concepts under which a number of terms are put.
I have a question.
Oh, sorry.
Why are some terms inactivated before can we turn on those terms?
Yeah, we're going to go in detail on into inactive.
Repeat the question, because I don't know if I said it.
So there was a question about why certain terms were inactivated. So the terms that are inactivated in the database I'm working in now, which is Hamilton, is based on their internal decisions about which terms that they will be using to index their records. In order to consistently describe programs and services, it's very important to make decisions about what kinds of terminology in the giant system that is the taxonomy are most appropriate for the programs and services that you're going to offer. In some cases, that means indexing using a very specific term, something very low down in the hierarchy. And in some cases, that means using a broader term because it really isn't necessary to get down to that specific level based on the kinds of programs and services that you have in your system. It's particularly important to do this within your own system, but it's also important to understand how that comes in when you share your records outside of your system. So it involves not just an internal decision-making process, but also a discussion with any of your data partners to whom you share information, who may have activations at different levels of the taxonomy. And when I get into both the indexing section and the taxonomy management section, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to deal with activations and how to deal with ensuring that you're getting some consistency in your indexing. And activations is the #1 way that you ensure consistent indexing of your program. That is, if you make sure that the only terms that can be added to records are the ones that you have pre-selected, then that makes it much, much easier for the people who are doing the data management work to know which terms are appropriate to use when they are doing the work of indexing. Okay, so it's incredibly important to do that upfront work and make sure that you activate appropriately. Wherever possible, activations should be at only one level in each branch. That isn't always possible, so it certainly isn't a hard and fast rule, but as I say, whenever it is possible, that is what you would like to do. Now, take an example such as we're going down the branch of food. There are different termination points, if you will, throughout the hierarchy. So some branches would terminate at this level, which is level 3, and some would continue going, like under emergency food, is continuing down to lower levels of the taxonomy and even further lower levels. Okay? So what's critical here, if you'll notice in what Hamilton has done, they have activated, here you'll see some at level 4 and some at level 5. However, within a single branch, meaning tracing this branch down, basic needs, food, emergency food, specialty food, there is nothing activated above halal food within that same branch. So if I follow up halal food, the broader term is specialty food provider, inactive. Broader term of that is emergency food, inactive. Broader term is food, inactive, and so on. So that one branch, following it down to its termination point, only has an activation at a single level. And that would make it very clear to the person doing the indexing that within that branch, the appropriate place to index is as low as possible, meaning the halal food. Okay? So they wouldn't index specialty food providers. It would be halal food and any other of the more detailed topics that might apply to that record. Whereas if they had inactivated all of these low levels and decided that the only thing they cared about classifying was specialty food providers, then rather than index halal food, they would be indexing specialty food providers. And it would apply to any of these subtopics that record happened to service. Is that clear? Does that answer your basic question? As I say, I'll go into even more detail about that in both the indexing and the management section today.
Some terms have a symbol beside them. What does the symbol mean?
Yeah, so as soon as I get through the different kinds of searches, we're going to go through what all of these little things mean, okay, and how to use them. So I'll talk again about related concepts. So related concepts are these umbrella concepts that group a number of terms, potentially from completely different branches of the taxonomy, under one topic. There are a number of related concepts that come with the taxonomy, meaning they're authorized, but it is possible for you to create your own topics, your own related concepts, your own umbrellas, if you will, under which you classify a group of terms for your own purposes. I believe that Hamilton only has pre-existing topics here, so I'm gonna assume that right now. So if I took, say, the animal concept and did a search, it would show me only terms that apply to the broad category of animals. So that can sometimes be helpful to, if you're having difficulty locating all of the potential terms, sometimes a related concept can help you to identify the possible terms based on some broad category. And again, this goes across branches. So if you'll see right now, I'll sort by code. You can see how many different branches have different topics to do with animals. Everything from guide dogs to animal shelters, they're all, although they are all in different areas, they all have the common thread of animals. And there are other ones like disabilities, there we go, hearing impairments, frail elderly, disaster services, all of these broad topics where you're going to find terms from a number of different branches all brought together under this one umbrella, okay? Because the lists do tend to be quite long, the usefulness of a related concept search is really, it's limited in that you're more likely to use it when you're trying to identify terms for indexing rather than doing searches, although, I mean, you may find that as well. But it is, because the lists do tend to be long, at least in the authorized list of topics, you may find that it's not the most efficient way to be identifying a term, but it can be a very useful method of identifying terms if you're having difficulty locating the right term. Okay, so I'll talk a bit now about what all of the different, the little icons next to everything mean. So the first one is the number, and just the way we discussed earlier, whenever you see a number next to a record, that implies that when you click on that number, it's going to perform a search, and the number indicates how many records it's going to return. In this particular case, the number indicates how many records in your database in the view you are working in, okay? So if I'm working in a view that only has a subset of the records, this number reflects the number of records in my view only, and it's indexed to that specific term, okay? So It would not include, if I take a high-level term like BM 1750, if there were subtopics of that term within like BM 1750 dash something else, it would not return any of the subtopics of that item. Okay? Trying to find a good example here. If I drill down. So let's just say, for argument's sake, that food was activated. Although, as I said earlier, we don't want to activate at multiple levels of the taxonomy whenever possible. But if there was a case where we had activated at multiple levels and there was, say, one record indexed to food and one indexed to food collection programs, searching food by number would not return any of those subtopics. Okay? So if I'll search right now grocery delivery, I'll search using the 4. It's going to bring up exactly 4 records. Okay, only the 4 records that have that exact item, grocery delivery, we can see here in our taxonomy. It's only bringing up those exact terms. It wouldn't bring up any subtopics. And you'll see here that it's put the word restrict. We discussed earlier about how restrict means only the exact term. It's automatically added that restrict for me, all right? And it's telling me that what I searched was grocery delivery. It has to match that term, and it's a restricted search. If I perform that same search, or if I perform a search with the magnifying glass, it does an unrestricted search. So if I search the magnifying glass with food, even though there's no records indexed to food, it's still going to return records for me because it's going to return food collection programs, food cleaning programs, grocery delivery, food production economics, anything that I can find that is a subtopic of food is going to be part of my search. Okay, so 116 records, but it has all different kinds of topics. Grocery stores, food banks, home-delivered meals, anything that's under that very broad category of food. And you'll notice that I don't have that little restrict that I had in my previous search. Whenever you see a magnifying glass next to a term, that indicates that you can find at least one record that is indexed either to that term or any of its subtopics. So I won't see a magnifying glass next to food rescue programs because there are no records indexed to food rescue programs or any of its potential subtopics. All right? So it's very, very possible to have an entire branch where there's no magnifying glass because there are no terms in that branch that are assigned to records in your view. All right? So those are the 2 kinds of searches that you can do from this screen. You can either do the restricted search, where you click on the number and it brings up exactly that number of records that represent the specific terms only. So it would only be discount programs and not anything at a lower level. Or you can do the magnifying glass search, which searches not just discount programs, but it would search any potential subtopics of that item. Any questions about those searches? Okay. Finally, the other icon that you may see when you're working in the basic taxonomy search in administrative mode is the edit icon, and we'll get into that later. But the edit icon will bring you into the management area of that particular term so that you can edit that specific term. So because the basic taxonomy search also doubles as our management area, when you're in admin mode, you can actually search for terms for the purposes of editing those terms. And this little edit icon, the paper with the pen, would be how you get into the screen to edit that specific term. That's where you would change the activations, add local descriptions, anything else that you might want. Okay? So that's it for basic taxonomy search. I'm going to do a search right now for consumer education and show you how we get into our advanced search. So from within a basic search, you can actually take that basic search and go into an advanced search. So this is the same thing that I could do from the front page going advanced taxonomy record search. If you started out doing a basic search, and decided that you needed to do a more advanced search, after you have finished that search, you can do add or remove terms. We'll bring you right to the advanced search with the current term that you had chosen, which is must match consumer education. From within the advanced search, you can do some really interesting and powerful things. You can search for more than one term at a time. You can say that it must match certain terms.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Or if you want to have a generous search where it matches any of the subtopics, and that includes within linked terms. So if I did a linked term of food and adults, that would mean any term in the database that matched adults or any of its subcategories linked with food or any of its subcategories. So this can be a very generous and flexible search. In addition, you have the ability to add criteria which take
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Search, and then add other criteria such as location, keywords, ages, dates, anything you would like. So anything that you can normally search by, as well as your taxonomy search that you created. I'm going to show you right now a couple of the features that you may or may not know about, even if you're familiar with it, that will also demonstrate some of the other, some of the purposes of having the advanced search. Except management. So it has all of these same keywords, code, drill down, related concepts, the ability to show only terms of record. Instead of admin mode, you'll see we have show inactive, which does the same thing in terms of showing any records that have been inactivated. But we do not see manage taxonomy because you cannot do taxonomy management from the advanced search. In addition, we have access to several other very interesting searches if we work with an existing term. So when I hit edit on my existing search, it moved that, or made a copy of that term into what is called my build term list. It's called a build term list because it allows you to assemble more than one term at a time as a linked set. So if I wanted to specify that I had a consumer education program for children, I could do a keyword search for children, or child in this case. And look, I know it's going to be under the Y branch, which is all of my target group. And I can say, too many, to be more specific. Adopted children, here we go, children, just general children. The red arrow moves the term from this search area into my build term list. If I have an existing term in my build term list, it adds it as a link. You'll see this little squiggle, this tilde, means that within the record, it has to have consumer education paired together with children to make what we call a compound term or a linked term, meaning I'm not just talking about consumer education, I'm specifically talking about consumer education targeted at children. Okay? So if I wanted to do that targeted search instead of my previous consumer education search, I can do that. So what I did was I removed my previous consumer education search and replaced it with consumer education and children. If I wanted to do, I'm going to do the same, I'll do reset. So if I do reset, it will bring it back to whatever my form was when I first came to the advanced search. Because I came from a previous search that had consumer education, it's reset myself to that set of just the consumer education. Again, I'm going to copy that back to my build list, and I'm going to ask it to suggest a link for me. In this case, there is a record in my database where I have linked consumer education together with insurance issues. So that's telling me right away that if I link consumer education with insurance issues, I'm going to remove consumer education and add consumer education insurance issues, I'm guaranteed to get at least one match. That's what the suggest a link has done for me. It's told me that somewhere in my database is a record that is linked consumer education to insurance issues. So I'll search that, and here I have two cases where I have, right here you can see consumer education linked with insurance issues. And here again, consumer education linked with insurance issues. This linked set comes with it if I'm in a particular version of the taxonomy field that does the basic or advanced taxonomy search. You'll recall earlier I said there is a version of the taxonomy field that does the browse by search, which is for public. This one, if you see with the little pluses, this is the staff-only search. If I click on these items, it's going to perform a basic or advanced taxonomy search for me. In this case, I can click on either one of the individual items in the linked set, or I can click on the plus to perform that exact search again, which is consumer education and insurance issues linked together. That's what the plus does for me. So I'll click the plus here with specialized information and referral and insurance issues. Okay, and again, it's going to bring up only records that have those two terms paired together in a compound term, meaning it's two terms that are meant to represent a single concept. I'm going to take this particular item and I'm going to send it back to my add or remove. I'm going to send it back to my advanced search. And in this case, I'm going to, the insurance issues one was quite interesting. So it looked like there were a number of items that had been linked to insurance issues. So I'm going to remove this term. I'm going to bring up insurance issues. I'm going to ask it to suggest links for insurance issues. So within my database, I know that I have insurance issues linked to all of these other terms, printed materials, industry consumer programs, trade associations, and so on. So that would tell me, again, if I pick any of these items and link them together with insurance issues, I'm guaranteed to have at least one match. You'll see what I did there was, just because I didn't clarify it before, I clicked must match. That brings your term from your build term list into your search list. If you don't click must match or match any, it will not search that item. So if I try to search like this, where I just have something sitting in the build term list but nothing else, it's going to warn me that I haven't selected any terms. I have to have it in either my match at least one from list or my must match list. If you only have one term, it actually doesn't matter which of those lists you put it in. But if you have multiple terms and they're under must match, then it has to match everything in your list. So one of the things that you might want to do, I'm going to, again, copy this back to my build term list. I'm going to ask it to suggest a term. Suggest a term is going to tell me what other terms are present in records that use the linked term trade associations and insurance issues. And it's telling me that there are records in my database that use this compound term that also use the term consumer education. So once again, I'm guaranteed if I select this, if I select this particular term and do a must match, I'm guaranteed that I'm going to find at least one record that has both the term consumer education and the compound term trade associations and insurance issues. Because the software did the searching for me and told me that I have records that have this compound term that also have the term consumer education. I'm going to remove the trade associations and just take my consumer education, put that into my build list. I'm going to ask it to suggest terms that of records that also use the term consumer education. You'll see I'll get a number of them. And again, I'm guaranteed if I only have consumer education and I suggest terms that also are in records that have consumer education, if I pick any one of these terms, then I'm guaranteed that I'm going to get at least one match. So consumer education and insurance issues. Oh, and again, what I did here, and this is probably one of the most annoying things in the software, it's automatically linked the two together, which is not necessarily what I wanted to do. In this case, it's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to add it as its own term. But until I clear this list, it's going to automatically build a linked term list for me. So anything that I keep clicking here is just going to add link, 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 link as one big compound term. until I move it, either by moving it to one of my lists down here, must match or match at least one from, or I clear my list so that I can start fresh, which is what I want to do. And then I'll add this to my must match list and search. So you'll see here I've brought up ones that have consumer education and insurance issues, which happen in this case to be linked together, but they wouldn't necessarily have to be, because I didn't do them as a linked term. You see the semicolon here. I didn't do them as linked terms. I did them as independent terms. That means they can match within a link or not within a link. One example here, if I search consumer education with printed materials, which I'll do right now, I'll remove insurance issues, and I'll look for printed materials instead. You'll see consumer education is within a compound term here, and printed materials is within a different compound term here, but it's matched anyway because I haven't constrained them to have to occur within a particular link set. They can occur independently or as a link set together. Does anyone have any questions so far?
Yes.
All right.
So previously, any terms with a code Y was not to be used as a term on its own. They are to be used as tagged terms. Has this changed?
No, that is absolutely correct. So the Y branch is called the target populations branch. And the intention of that branch is to allow you to specifically create compound terms where you're saying, here is a topic that I picked from some other area of the taxonomy. Let's take consumer education. And I had given an example where we might want to say that, you know, this organization runs a consumer education program targeted primarily at youth or targeted primarily at children, which is a very specialized program. So the target population branch allows me to take the general topic of consumer education and refine it to indicate that this isn't just a general consumer education program. This is a consumer education program that is targeted at a particular group. All right, so that is the purpose of the Y branch, is these what they call target populations. And that's why they aren't intended to be used on their own. They're intended to add a description to another kind of topic. Unlike the thesaurus, which is, as I said before, really general, it's where you would absolutely just add girls or women or children. This is very different. It's intended to provide very, very explicit descriptions of the kinds of services that are being offered. So rather than adding general topics, the taxonomy aims to be as explicit as possible to describe the services offered. That said, you don't have to add a target population or to describe your services. It's there as a tool if that service is a targeted service. Okay, so I would certainly not do consumer education adults, consumer education youth, consumer education children, or for instance, do consumer education and then add every target population known to man to indicate that it was a general service. Rather, you would only add those target populations if it was a restricted program that was directed only at a specific target population. But I'll get into that more when we get into indexing. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, one more? No? Okay. I did want to clarify a bit more about what must match and match at least one from do. So I'm going to take consumer education, and again, I'm going to send it up to my build list, and I'm going to ask it to suggest some terms for me. So just because all of these particular terms are in the same records as consumer education, it doesn't mean they're all in those records together. So I could say, show me consumer education insurance issues. I'm going to put this match any. Printed materials. Trade associations. And if I did this search, I would have to have a record. I would have to return a record that had consumer education in it, So it must have consumer education in it, and has to have at least one from insurance issues, printed materials, or trade associations, but only one. It doesn't have to have all three. So for format search, in this case, it's bringing up the same records again, where it's matched insurance issues. But if I took this record here, and let's say it was consumer education and trade associations and didn't have insurance issues, that would still match, because it only needs to match one from the match at least one from list. Hence why it's called match at least one from. And finally, I'm going to go back here and get rid of all my extra things. And I'm going to send this to the advanced search form using add criteria. Finally, you can be specific about the area of service. So I can say I want consumer education, but I want it in Hamilton. And none. All right. Add criteria. How about... Oh, that's one thing I should point out. It doesn't remember your advanced search criteria. It only remembers your taxonomy criteria. So don't expect to do your search as I did here and click advanced search again and have it have your old search items back. It doesn't work that way. But you can use the back button to go back to your form, and then it would show it. So I'm going to say serving community Hamilton instead of located in. I think I'll get better results. And again, I did, because they're all three located in Toronto, but they happen to serve Hamilton. So you can do any, as I said earlier, any advanced criteria that you would normally do, and it does remember all of your specific taxonomy searches that you build, and you can modify that list of terms at any time. And if you are in a record and you say, click, I want to show all the records that are printed material on insurance issues, and you wanted to then modify that search, you can absolutely do that. So even from within the record itself, if you see a set of terms that applies to whatever it is you're working in, so if I want to see industry consumer programs, you can then take that and do an advanced search or add or remove additional terms using that advanced form that we looked at earlier. And once again, to just reiterate what restrict does, if I restrict, it has to match exactly the terms that I have chosen. If I do not restrict, then it will match that term and any subtopics of that term. And that includes within a linked set. Okay, so that's it for the advanced taxonomy search. Do we have any questions on those? And I think that actually covers all of our taxonomy search types. So does anyone have any questions right now on searching with the taxonomy? And then the next thing we're going to talk about is indexing. Okay. So you'll notice when we get into indexing that this is going to look very, very familiar to you because it looks almost exactly like what we saw in the advanced search. Because the taxonomy indexing system is so complex, and because the licensing agreements for using the taxonomy are quite restrictive, we've had to have the taxonomy system work as a separate area of the software, meaning there are separate permissions about who can update the taxonomy, and there is a completely separate management area for indexing with the taxonomy. The permissions in particular are important because when you pay your licensing fees for the taxonomy, and I know that up until now, generally speaking, none of you have had to directly pay your taxonomy licensing fees because they had been covered in initial agreements. But on an ongoing basis, you will have the obligation to ensure that only the users from your agency that have paid the fees do taxonomy indexing. What that's going to mean, what that's going to mean is that there could be instances where only one group within your database, if you have multiple agencies, actually has the licensing permissions to do the indexing, and that they could potentially be responsible for indexing all the records in the database, not just the ones that they have regular update privileges for. Because of the fact that if you have many, many, many agencies within your database, the way that you do your licensing with InfoLine may not cover all of the agencies who do record updates in your database. And it is important to ensure that you're in compliance with your InfoLine license. So that means that your permissions should only allow those particular users who belong to agencies that have an active taxonomy license to do updating of the taxonomy. And that, again, can mean that you have users who are updating the taxonomy in records that are not owned by their agency. Just to explain why it's separate. And again, and the other reason why it's separate is it really is such a complex tool to do the indexing that it really does need its own interface. It doesn't fit in very well with the regular update form. So now that that background's behind us, if we click Update Service Categories, you'll see this looks tremendously similar to the advanced search that we just did. Again, we have our build term list, and we have the terms that are currently selected for the particular record. In this case, there's none. I believe this is a non-public record I'm working in. Okay. I may add some terms to this. Since it's non-public, I may add some terms to this record temporarily. It works just like we saw earlier in the advanced search, meaning that you can add terms to your build list, and if you keep adding to that build list, it will link those terms together. And once you've done that, I'll take now, let's say I don't know what M&L testing equipment does, which I don't. I can choose to show any fields within the database to try and give me the background that I need to do proper indexing. So in this case, I'm going to look at the description. It says they do testing equipment for concrete, plastic, steel. Sounds like something I need NAICS for. But let's just say that I want to see if I can find any terms that match distributors. Okay, so completely not applicable, but let's just pretend that they are apparel distribution. And I'll add that to my record. You'll see that again we have suggest link and suggest term. Those work exactly the same way that we saw in the other, meaning if I do suggest link, it's going to suggest other based on other records in the database, terms that I might want to link to apparel distribution. If I do suggest term, it's going to show me other terms that records that use apparel distribution also have. But better than that, we have a brand new kind of search from within our indexing screen, and that is the by record search. By record allows you to bring up records that have a similar topic or are have a similar parent organization, whatever you like, something where it may be able to guide you into the process of doing an appropriate indexing that is consistent with the indexing you've done in other areas of the database. So in this case, I might want to find other businesses that have to do with testing. So I can say find other records that have testing in Words Anywhere. All right. And if I find any that I think are applicable, let's just say I think, okay. Let's say I think home support services is applicable, even though it obviously isn't. If the record is linked, that means that that record has been indexed to the taxonomy. If the record is not linked, such as APC filtration, it means that record has not been indexed with the taxonomy, and I won't be able to get any further information about that record. So I'll take Ancaster Home Healthcare Home Support Services, which has been indexed. I'll click on it, and it's going to bring up a list of all of the taxonomy terms that have been indexed to that particular record. And if the record has a similar theme and a similar kind of set of services, then I would be able to just copy over as many of those services as I thought applied, one at a time, adding the terms, as many as I want. And if I hit Submit Updates, it's then going to save those terms to my record. And I don't want to modify this record because this is Hamilton's database. But that's the general point. And again, I can do search for suggest links. So here we have pastoral counseling of inmates is one example of linked terms that have happened in the past. If I wanted to search for the other records that use pastoral counseling and inmates, I'm going to copy the text pastoral counseling. I'm going to do a by record search, service categories, and there we go. The Salvation Army has linked pastoral counseling and inmates. So I would be able to see right off the bat, here is another example of a record that has used this particular set of terms that I'm looking at, and I can see how they've used them together and what other similar sets of terms or linked terms this particular record might have used. Okay. I'm going to take you out of the indexing screen just for a moment and talk a little bit about indexing practice. So I'm going to do my base. Oh, sorry.
The membership. You had some discussion about the membership.
Oh, is there a licensing question?
It was true. That the licensing being asked about the licensing being done through Inform Canada as a membership?
Yes. So the taxonomy licensing is currently managed through Inform Canada. CIOC does have some obligation before we can activate the taxonomy in your database to ensure that at least one agency within the database has an active taxonomy license. But it is the member's responsibility to ensure compliance. If we are informed that any of the members are out of compliance, CIOC also has an obligation through our own agreement with Infoline to potentially inactivate the taxonomy if it is being used without a license and the member can't prove that they are holding a valid and current license for the taxonomy. So it is really, really important to ensure that you do have a compliant license and that the people that are using the taxonomy for indexing have the rights to do that. But CIOC does not manage your license. Okay, just to be clear, CIOC does not manage the license. But as a vendor that distributes the taxonomy, we have signed an agreement saying that we can't encourage non-compliance. So if we know that you're not compliant, we have an obligation to do something about it.
So follow-on question, if VIQ and VIK and ICF are members, they all have to have a license to index.
Right. So that's correct. The question is, if you have the multiple agencies in a single database, they all have to have a taxonomy subscription. That is correct if they are all indexing. So let's say that you have the 3 agencies in your database, and only one of them was doing the taxonomy indexing for all the records in the database, then only that one organization would have to have a license. But if all 3 agencies are indexing, then they all 3 have to have a valid subscription, or there has to be a subscription for the umbrella organization that represents the group, or so on. But there has to be a subscription that covers every single person who has permissions to do indexing. That's correct. So in the case of what we were just saying, if there was one agency that had its own subscription and that subscription didn't cover another partner agency, then that partner agency would not have the rights to do indexing unless they got their own subscription. And again, it is really important that you make sure that you are in compliance. Infoline is very, very strict about it and does keep on top of licensing issues. So you do not want to be out of compliance.
Okay, so we have a question about specifically how to index a specific term such as dialectical behavior therapy. And is it possible that the taxonomy does not contain a required term?
Okay, so this is sort of getting into specifics, which I said I can't cover content for you because it's out of my scope. And although I have some background because I've read about 8 million taxonomy documents, I don't know the content of the taxonomy. I know the theory of the taxonomy. So it's very difficult for me to give you advice on indexing with any one specific term. What I can give you is general advice on what to do if you don't know how to index. So you have a few different roads that you should take. Your first and best thing that you should do is always to look at the description of the specific term, understanding that the whole purpose of the description is to tell you how to use that term and what topics it covers. So I particularly come into this screen because I have an example that I found in Hamilton's database that would give us a really good basis to look at certain indexing practices. So in this case, I'm going to look for newborn screening, and I want to discuss some of the ways that newborn screening has been used in these records and how how we can identify good indexing practices and avoid some bad indexing practices. So hopefully this will answer some of your questions. So in this particular case, I've done a search for newborn screening, and we see 3 different ways in which the term newborn screening has been used. In this particular record, newborn screening is an independent item which has been used in combination with a particular kind of screening called hearing screening, grouped together with the target population of infants. In our second record, we have newborn screening as a general independent item. And in our third record, we have newborn screening as a linked term paired with hearing screening. Now, if you're being thoughtful today and you have your thinking caps on, you'll see right away that we seem to have a discrepancy between the way that we have used hearing screening and newborn screening in this record and the way that we have paired hearing screening together with newborn screening in record number 3. And finally, we do wonder, does newborn screening here, used independently, also cover the topic of newborn hearing screening? So, how would we know how to properly be indexing this record? And again, Hamilton has given me particular permission to find a problem and highlight it to you. So this was my problem example term for the day. So what I'm going to do to try and resolve this issue is I'm going to start with this particular program, the Early Words Infant Hearing Program. And I'm going to try and understand why the particular choices of indexing that were made. So, and I'll go into this particular record here, and I'm going to go into Update Service Categories. And I want to know a little bit more about newborn screening. So I have 2 options. I can type in newborn screening here and bring it up. Or if I'm feeling lazy and don't want to touch the keyboard, I can actually pop it into my build term, to suggest a link, and find it from my suggest a link and get there that way. So here I'm going to get some more information about newborn screening by clicking the term and reading the description. And one thing that we'll notice that's important when we're reading this description is it does specifically mention newborn hearing screening. Okay, so that would imply that newborn hearing screening is part of what is covered in the general term of newborn screening. Okay, so that would tell me to begin with that it isn't necessary to pair newborn screening with hearing specifically because this term indicates that this covers hearing screening. All right, this term is intended to cover newborn screening of many types, one of which is hearing screening. So why do I have hearing screening as a separate set? in this case, I believe that the indication is that this particular program covers not just newborns, but also infants being up to the age of 18 months. Whereas newborn screening generally occurs within, as it says here, within 1 to 2 weeks after birth, okay, or within the first 24 hours of life. So this is distinguishes between the hearing screening that is done on newborns and a hearing screening that may be done on older babies, okay? So we can absolutely see how this is a legitimate indexing practice on this particular record. But you'll recall that we saw some different practices in other records. So I'm going to go and look in service categories for by record for newborn screening and find those other records. Here we are. There's 3 records, one including our current record, of all of these records that have newborn screening as part of their service categories. And I'm going to take a look at those other records and what was in them. So in the case of this record, you'll see we had newborn screening on its own, which is likely legitimate and just falls under the same kind of categories that we had looked at in the description of newborn screening. But we have this second record where we have paired hearing screening with newborn screening. So why would that have happened? So if we go into that particular record, my guess, and I haven't looked in the details, but why would we ever do that? It may be that they're trying to indicate that it is newborn screening, but it is specifically newborn hearing screening, as opposed to just the general newborn screening, which would include all kinds of other tests, such as for cystic fibrosis or the PKU test and so on. By pairing it with hearing screening, I'm indicating that in this particular case, it's not just the general newborn screening. It is very specifically the hearing screening portion of the newborn screening. Okay, so there's a few ways that I've determined the particular practices that I might use indexing with that term. One is, as I say, most importantly, you need to read the particular information about newborn screening. You have to read the description. That is the #1 place that you're going to get information about how to use that term. Secondly, it's really important to have consistency and logic behind why you are doing the pairings that you are doing. So that's going to be on a record-by-record basis where you're trying to determine the best possible description for the kind of service that is offered. And that's going to be based on what you have done in other records, which is why we did our by-record search, because you want to maintain that consistency. But also, it has to be based on how specific or general the particular service being offered is. And finally, your next resource is going to be the community. So it's going to be very important to, if you don't know how to use a term or don't know what an appropriate term to use is, there are specifically forums and places where you can go to ask about how to index a particular record or how to use a particular term. So if you do run into that kind of difficulty, then that's what you need to do. And if you find that the description of a particular term does not adequately describe how to use it, then the proper course of action is to contact the managers of the taxonomy. So to contact Georgia and say, the specific description you have given does not tell me how to properly use this term. And they're very responsive and will likely either give you the advice you need or perhaps make a modification to the description to make it clear how to use that particular term. In terms of whether you should be using a particular term or not, as I had discussed earlier, one of the most important decisions you're going to be making when you use the taxonomy is how you activate the taxonomy. So what levels of the taxonomy are you going to use in your database? And that's going to mean several kinds of considerations. So what kinds of terms are the people in your community likely to search on? What kinds of services does your community have or require? And that will really guide you into the depth of the taxonomy that is necessary in order to adequately index the programs and services in your area. But finally, you have to consider how your particular indexing practice fits in with the practices of others, because most of you are involved in data sharing agreements where your records will come together. And when they do, if you all have very different indexing practices, it does make it more challenging for people searching the larger set of information to find that information, because consistency is the #1 helper to allow you to find the information and to get it out. Okay, so it's about understanding the detail of the service that is being offered. So I gave an example of those 3 newborn screening ones. Why were they different? We have 3 different uses of the term newborn screening, and why. So in the case of the early words, we didn't put hearing screening in with the newborn screening because we learned by reading the description for newborn screening that it does encompass hearing screening as well. But the one thing that is the discrepancy, if you will, because I pointed out that I'd also done this to show how we deal with discrepancies. Obviously, we're learning right now here in this record, we're being very specific that the newborn screening is specifically only the hearing screening. And yet in this record, we aren't being specific that the newborn screening is only for the hearing. However, if we look at the description of the record, early words, infant hearing program, we can guess right away that this doesn't offer all of those other kinds of newborn screening, like the PKU, like the cystic fibrosis test, all of those other metabolic disorders that would be tested as part of the newborn screening program. It's in some ways misleading to not clarify that this is not a general newborn screening program. So it is really important to have consistency and to be specific. That is how the taxonomy works. It is a really huge system, really huge and really complex, and it can be very powerful, but it's only effective if you are consistent and specific. I don't know if that confused people more, but can I offer any further clarification? Any other questions?
Not on this, but I have a question.
Okay, so that is the process of indexing. As I said, it's incredibly close to the process of advanced search. The major differences to note are you can view any of the fields of the record to try and assist you in identifying appropriate terms. You have this by record search, which allows you to locate other records of a similar kind, either records from the same parent organization, records with a similar topic or theme, records that have used the particular terms that you're considering using, so that you can see how that record was used in a different record, and so on. And other than that, it has all of the same features that we saw in advanced search. And again, you will only be able to add records that are terms that are active. So even if I show inactive terms, that doesn't mean that I can add those terms to my record. So you would only want to see inactive terms if you're just banging your head against a wall trying to find a particular topic, and you think, you know, this is completely illogical. There should be a term for whatever it is, mountain climbing, and there isn't one. Well, it may be that that term has been inactivated because the person who set up the activations in your database didn't feel that that was a term that was ever going to apply to your particular database or indexing practices. And it's helpful to you to be able to show the inactive records and find those inactive terms, because it may lead you to another related term or another term that you should use instead of that inactivated term. Keeping in mind that if you inactivate a term and roll it up, this is something we'll talk about next when we talk about management, or shortly when we talk about management. If you inactivate a term and roll it up, that term automatically becomes a used reference being an unused term, an alternate form of that term. And when you do a keyword search for a record that has a use reference, it would guide you into the correct term to be using.
Is that a request to review the other two descriptions?
Other two descriptions.
Which other two descriptions?
Sorry, just 1 minute. We need a little clarification here.
Descriptions of the other two records.
Oh, so I agree that would be an incredibly useful feature, but it isn't one we have right now. So I would really love to see that as an enhancement where, I'll repeat that. So I'll do my newborn screening search again. Oh, and suddenly it's been added to something else. That's interesting. Oh, here we go, service categories, because I didn't search in service categories. But that does tell me if I'm getting newborn screening in Words Anywhere and not service categories, that maybe something is missing from the service categories in one of those records. So I'll do a service category search and got my 3 records that have been indexed to newborn screening. Now, early words, I can go ahead and view the description of that record up here, and the question was, can we view the description of these other records that we found? And the answer is we can't do that right now, but that would be a great enhancement and absolutely possible. Does that help? Probably not. That would not be a difficult enhancement, and we could absolutely do that, but it does not do that right now. Right now it only shows you the indexing. However, as is always the case, you can open up a new tab if you really want to know and find that record. Oh, I should use the same address so I'm logged in. Oh, form.ham. Okay. So if I really needed to know why there was a discrepancy, I could just, in another tab or window, bring up that record and view the description. It's certainly not, it's not the best thing, and in the long run, I absolutely agree it would be very, very helpful to have not just a list of terms, but also be able to view the description of these records that it finds. I agree that that would be very, very helpful, but it doesn't do that right now, sadly. Any other questions about indexing?
The general taxonomy.
Yeah, there's a general question.
So the general question is that they have been indexing and they want that it's not public, and they want to know what needs to happen in order to make the indexing show publicly.
Right. Okay. So we will be covering that in the last item, or second to last item. So what I have left for the taxonomy is I'm going to discuss the 3 fields, the 3 taxonomy fields that you can add to your records and how to do that. Then I'm going to talk about your view setup and how to, which will cover your question of how do I offer the taxonomy to the public. And then finally, I'm going to talk about how you manage the taxonomy itself. Okay, so we'll be covering that in just a moment. I think that's everything. Okay. So I will leave the early words infant hearing program. If I wanted to make change to the record, I would simply hit submit updates and it would update that. And if I do reset form, it will reset it back to whatever the original indexing for the record was. Okay, so there are 3 taxonomy fields in the database. I'm going to go into the setup, into field display, and I'm going to talk about the 3 kinds of taxonomy fields that we have. We have taxonomy, we have taxonomy staff, and there is a 3rd one called taxonomy no link, which I don't know where it is on here. Taxonomy, which may be called whatever you choose. It's, by default, it would have come to you called service categories. because that is the public terminology that we use for the taxonomy. That is the public version of the taxonomy field. So if you wish to include the taxonomy field in a public site, you can use the one called taxonomy. Alternatively, you can use the field called taxonomy no link. Pardon me. There we go. Taxonomy no link can be used for either public or staff because it does not do any searches at all. So the taxonomy field does a public search that browse by service category search. Taxonomy no link doesn't do any searches at all. It simply lists the terms, but they are not linked, so you cannot perform any kind of search. Finally, we have the taxonomy underscore staff. Taxonomy underscore staff is the executes the basic or advanced taxonomy search. So this is a staff-only field. It should never be added to a publicly available details page because the searches that are linked are not available to the public. Okay? So you do not need more than one taxonomy field in your view. There's no real point in doing that. Usually one of the three is all you will ever need. So the no link is if you don't want the people who are viewing the record to be able to do any kind of search whatsoever from the taxonomy. The taxonomy with nothing, just plain taxonomy, will allow a browse by service category search. And the taxonomy staff field is the specialized field that allows you to do a basic, advanced, the same kind of search, a basic or advanced taxonomy search, including the ability to search linked terms from within the record. So again, if I'm in the record and I look at the taxonomy, this has both. So if I look at the taxonomy search that is the staff one, I have these pluses, which allows me to search linked terms. So if I click on the plus next to any set of linked terms, it's going to search the compound term. If I click on the individual term name, it's going to search on the individual term name. This service categories field up here, which is the publicly available field, again, there's no pluses. You can't search based on linked terms. And if I click on the terms, it's going to provide the same kind of search that I get when I do a browse by service category. Now, how do you add these fields to your display? Oh, you'll also see that you can add use references and related terms as well. These are generated fields for the taxonomy. They do not, you cannot actually add or remove values. And they're not actually necessary to display in your record. So unless you feel that they're helpful to you in some way to be able to see this additional information, I actually don't recommend that you add them to your record details page. They do make the display of the record details page slower for no particular reason if you're not using them. And in particular, and it doesn't affect the search of the record, so only the display, so only what you're looking at on the record details page. The related terms you may find useful, but if you have never clicked on any of the related terms while viewing a record, then it probably isn't worth your while to add it to your record details page. Really, all you need to have is just one taxonomy field. Anything else that you choose to add, such as the taxonomy modified information, taxonomy notes isn't a real field. This would be some extra field that they have added, okay? Just to be clear, there is no taxonomy notes field. This is some extra field that Hamilton has repurposed as taxonomy notes. But there is a real taxonomy date modified and a taxonomy modified by. So you can add those if you wish, so you can see who last modified the service category information. And you need one taxonomy field. Anything else you add is your choice. How do you add and remove those? That is done through your view setup. So CIOC views. I'll pick the data management view. The bottom of the form, you'll see the details fields in the details field group. So if I go to details fields, then I can add any one field to a particular group. So in this case, this has just the subject. If I wanted it to, instead of the taxonomy staff, I could add it to any of the groups that I wanted and just hit update and it would add it. Okay? So that's done through the details field management. These are your groups that you're picking from of your views. The view setup in general will be covered in a...
Every time you do drop down, it makes the window go away.
Oh.
Because it's not, because you're only sharing the window and not the whole thing. That's one of the intentions of that.
Sorry if you're getting some weird behavior when I click on drop downs. I didn't realize that. That's part of the webinar software. So you do the manage fields and add them to the particular group you want. I'll be covering the field management in detail in a future session. So the other setup item that you have for the setup items that you have for the taxonomy in your view are, first and foremost, you have to check off whether or not the taxonomy is available in your view. So once I have turned the taxonomy on in your database, meaning you have given me some official evidence that you have a valid taxonomy subscription and you make a request to me to turn the taxonomy on in your database, then you would have the ability to add that taxonomy to any one of the views in your database. So you just make sure that it's checked. And then you'll recall when we did our Browse by Service category search that at some levels it showed the description of that term, and in some levels it did not. And that is based on your show definitions for taxonomy level X, whatever and above. Okay, so if you put 0, it will not show definitions at any level, so it will just list the terms. If you did level 3, then it would show descriptions for every level down to level 3, and then it would stop showing descriptions and so on. Okay? So those are your 2 taxonomy setup items that you have on a view-by-view basis. So if you want to add it to your public view, the basic step is to come in to your view setup and click taxonomy menu items and searches are available, and to go into your details fields. If you want the taxonomy to show in the record, which is really up to you, it isn't a requirement, then you could add either the taxonomy no link field or the taxonomy field. Those are both available to the public. The software doesn't prevent you from adding the taxonomy staff fields to a public view. That is your responsibility to make sure that you don't add it. If you do add it, it doesn't mean they're going to get permissions to do something that they shouldn't, but it does mean that the searches aren't going to work properly. So it's a bad choice. Okay, any questions about those setup items?
So Gary is asking whether you said that Gary is asking if you said that the user references field is not searchable. His understanding is that their ongoing, extensive ongoing taxonomy debate.
That is not true that the use references are not searchable. They are searchable. What I said was adding or removing it from your details page doesn't affect the searches. That's what I said. The use references are automatically included in your keyword search no matter what. So you can't stop that. That's what happens. Keep in mind, too, that the words anywhere search always includes the taxonomy, even if the taxonomy isn't included in the particular view. Okay, so the words anywhere search works the same in every view no matter what. Doesn't matter whether or not you've activated the taxonomy. The only difference is the service category button right here would not be available if the taxonomy wasn't activated in that view. But the words anywhere search is still going to search taxonomy terms behind the scenes, even if it's not available in the view. So the last item I'm going to cover on the taxonomy, and yes, it's been long, is the taxonomy management. And I'm going to focus on the types of changes that you should expect to make and a little bit about how we are currently updating the taxonomy and how we hope to be updating it in the future. I'm going to do this through my own site. I don't want to be tinkering in Hamilton. So taxonomy management is, as I said earlier, is done through the basic taxonomy search. In some cases, you'll be working in administrative mode, which will allow you to see the edit icon next to any given term. From within the edit form, you can change the code. You can specify whether or not a term is authorized, change its English or French name, the source, meaning where the term came from, the official English and French definition, the alternate English and French names and definitions, the facet, which is a predefined, there are 5 predefined facets that are officially from InfoLine, the use references, which are alternate terms that mean the same thing as the official term name. So in this case, the term is material goods. And the alternate forms of material goods are goods exchanges and material resources. And that's both English and French use references. The also references, which are related terms, related concepts, which we discussed earlier, which are the umbrella concepts where you can group a number of terms from different branches under the same topic. And you can write particular comments, specifically if you wanted to make local notes about how to use that term for your data managers, so that you wanted to clarify beyond what was provided by InfoLine, then you have the ability to add comments. You can add an icon. I discussed earlier with the Browse by Service Category Search that if you want to add a small icon next to any of the terms, that you can do that. And that is particularly useful for the public so that they can see at a glance what a particular topic is about. And finally, you can change the activation of the term. You can set a term to be active, inactive, or roll it up to a higher level term. Rolling a term up means that it's going to become a use reference for the term at the next highest level. So if I rolled up material goods, it would automatically roll into the category B, which is the next higher level, B being basic needs. So material goods would become a use reference or an alternate term for basic needs. So a little more about activation. Activation is fully at your control. And again, the preferred method is to activate only at one place in each branch of the hierarchy. That does not mean that across the entire taxonomy you're always going to be activating at level 3 or always activating at level 4. Even within one section of the taxonomy, say we take this section, the material goods section, it's possible that within material goods we're going to have some terms activated at level 3 and some at level 4 and some at level 5. That's fine. It's not that you have to be consistently at one level across the entire taxonomy. It's that within each branch, you shouldn't have activations at multiple levels. So I shouldn't be activating material goods and a subtopic of material goods. If I activate material goods, then everything above and below material goods should preferably not be activated. Okay? And this really is an activity that is going to take you a lot of time and thought and really should be done in discussion with any of the partners with whom you share your data. Because as much as you can, you want to have similar kinds of terminology as any of the organizations that you share information with, because that does provide for better searches for anyone using the terms. Okay?
There's been a request to define what you mean by branch of the technology.
Okay. There's a request to define a branch of the taxonomy. So if you think of the, since we're talking about branches, I'll use a tree metaphor. And if you think of the taxonomy as a set of, one tree for every one of the main first levels of the taxonomy. So in this case, we have one for basic needs, one for consumer services, one for criminal justice, and those are the trunks of the tree. They'll have large branches coming out, which would then have smaller and smaller branches and so on. And what we're saying is, if I follow to the very tip of any one of those branches, I should only have one activation the whole way down. So if I'll follow the hierarchy down of basic needs. This, in my taxonomy, it breaks all the rules. So this is a really good place for me to show you what not to do. So my taxonomy is very bad. My taxonomy in my database breaks the rules of not activating at multiple levels. If you'll see right here, I have an activation at level 5, occasional emergency food assistance, and I have an activation at level 4, food banks. Level 3 is not activated, but level 2 and level 1 are. That shows that we have activation at multiple levels. Now, what would be the preferred thing to do? What we should do here, if we want to be able to index occasional emergency food assistance and ongoing emergency food assistance, then we should deactivate food banks. And all of the things that are activated, the 73 records that are currently activated at food banks, should instead be indexed to one of the two subtopics of food banks, either occasional or ongoing. I shouldn't have any at food banks. Alternatively, if I decide, well, look at this, I only have one record here that is indexed to the lower level of occasional emergency food assistance, maybe it just doesn't make sense for me to distinguish between ongoing and occasional. So what I should do is go into this particular record and modify it. And instead of occasional emergency food assistance, I'm going to add its parent term, which is food banks. Okay, so I'll add food banks, and I'll get rid of occasional emergency food assistance. Pardon my slow. Well, that's updating. There we go. Pardon my uncooperative computer. So I'll go back now that I've gotten rid of that one item that we had that was in enter. Okay. So you'll see that I've gotten rid of that one item that was under occasional emergency food assistance. So what I should be doing is inactivating both of these two lower levels. So I should go into admin mode. That says grub because that is my alternate name for food. So I can go into occasional emergency food assistance and inactivate it. Oh, so slow. So you'll see now that item is inactivated, and I would not be able to add it to records. And I should do the same for ongoing emergency food assistance. And I should also inactivate GRUB, which is food and basic needs, so that along this one branch, which contains food banks, I only have one activation along that branch. Now that doesn't mean that I couldn't inactivate at a lower level for different reasons. So under emergency food, maybe I want to index down to level 4, which is the level that food lines and food banks are on. But under a different branch of food, say food outlets, I might want to index only to level 3 at food outlets. And a different one, like, here we go, meals. I need one that goes lower down, food production. Here we go. Food production, I might want to index all the way down to an even lower level because it's important to me for whatever reason to have that fine of a detail. But that means if I'm going to activate agriculture aviation services, I should be deactivating its parent term, which is food production support services. So it doesn't matter which level I'm choosing to activate on. It just means for every term that I have activated, there should be no terms that are higher or lower in this hierarchy. So above it or below it in the branch, meaning as I drill down, I'm drilling down in a single branch. I should be able to find no terms higher or lower than it that are activated. Okay, so it doesn't matter which level, although you really should never index level 1 or 2. Especially level 1, never. The software doesn't even allow you to index level 1 terms. They're not appropriate to add to records. But other than that, really whatever level you choose to use that is appropriate for your work is fine. But what you don't want to do is confuse the matter by saying, I'm going to activate food banks and ongoing emergency food assistance, and have some of your records have food banks in them and some have ongoing emergency food assistance in them. That inconsistency is really bad for searching. It's just poor data management practice. It looks bad. All in all, bad idea. So the way that you prevent that from happening is to use your activations to help guide your data managers when they're doing their indexing. Any more questions about activations or anything like that? Yes, I'm going back to the editing form in a moment. Are there any more questions about activations? Okay, so back to our editing form. I'm going to go into GRUB here, which I've obviously changed the name of. In this particular instance, I have added an alternate name of GRUB. Okay, so you can, although I strongly recommend you don't, you can add an alternate name from the official name distributed by InfoLine if you do not want to display the name that InfoLine presents. In all searches, it will search both the alternate name and the official name. So we have another question.
Permissions required for doing inactivations, and probably should mention generally speaking.
So permissions, the work that I'm doing right now is all done by super users. So as far as I recall, you have to be a super user to be doing any of these changes to the taxonomy. I would have to go in and confirm that because I always work as a super user. But as far as I recall, you must be a super user to do editing and work in the administrative mode of the taxonomy. I wanted to be clear that anything that comes directly from InfoLine, meaning the official code, whether the official name, the official definition, the facet, the authorized use references, and so on, you should never change those. If you do, they will simply be overwritten the next time the taxonomy is updated. So if you need to make changes to the term for some reason, first of all, make sure that you really need to make that change. Maybe you don't understand the way the term should be used. Maybe you're unaware of another term in the database. Maybe you don't realize that there's a use reference that covers that term. Whatever the case may be sure that you really need to make that change. The advantage of having the same official name that everybody in in some cases that everybody in North America is using is consistency. You really want to have the same consistent terminology that everyone is using. So although you might personally prefer to use one of the alternate terms, like maybe you would rather be using food programs than food, by using the same term that everyone is using, you're promoting consistency. So be really sure that you want to use something different. Second, you really need to be careful about how you change the information. If you change the official fields, they will be overwritten when the taxonomy is updated. That is why there are certain things that are provided to allow you to do customization, such as the alternate name and definition, and the ability to add additional use references that are not authorized. This is key. If you update an authorized use reference or remove an authorized use reference instead of inactivating it, it will simply be replaced the next time the taxonomy is updated. You cannot just overwrite official information because it's just going to be restored. It's really important to use the facilities provided to you to do what we are calling local changes. That means you can create new local terms, although again, be very, very sure that you need a local term. Your first step is always to contact the official maintainers of the taxonomy to ensure that there isn't already a term you should be using or that they don't want to incorporate it into the official taxonomy. That is always your first step. But if you need to add a new local term, you must mark it as local. By marking it as local, you protect it in between updates of the taxonomy. Likewise, if you add new use references or see also references, anything else where you make a change, if you make it local, not authorized, then it will be preserved between updates because it recognizes that that is a local change. If you simply remove authorized items instead of inactivating them, they will come back again and again and again with every taxonomy update that you get. Okay, so unfortunately I really have run into cases where people have done extensive work modifying their taxonomy and modifying the official information, and I have to give them the heartbreaking news that everything they did is just going to be blown away the next time there's a taxonomy update because they didn't use the alternate names, the alternate definition, the unauthorized use references, and so on. So it is really important. It's perfectly fine if you are aware of an upcoming change to the taxonomy and you want to incorporate those authorized changes and mark them as authorized. That's perfectly fine. The issue with changing authorized information is it will reset to whatever the official version is whenever we get a taxonomy update. Okay? The way that we manage taxonomy updates right now is certainly not ideal. It is done behind the scenes because we do not have a facility in the software right now to load the taxonomy data automatically. We really do want to have that in the future, but we don't have that right now. So we do taxonomy updates on a semi-regular basis, about 3, maybe 4 times a year. Those are announced ahead of time and are done automatically by me behind the scenes. If there are any conflicts or issues during the taxonomy updating process, the official contact for that database is given a list of the problem terms so that they can deal with those individually. But basically you don't do anything. The taxonomy update happens automatically for you at this point. All right, any questions about the taxonomy term management?
Just perhaps some guidelines on which fields are the fields that are open for customization as opposed to the ones that are the standard fields.
Yeah, absolutely. So the official ones are the code, the term name, both French and English, the definition, both French and English, the facet, the use references that are marked as authorized, both English and French, the see also references that are marked as authorized, related concepts. The authorized concepts are authorized, obviously, and the unauthorized concepts are not. So if you add your own local related concepts, then you can do your own management of those. But the authorized related concepts will be reset to whatever the authorized list is. Okay, so because you can create your own local related concepts, your management of your local ones is totally up to you, but the official ones are automatically updated. And this all the alternate stuff is all customized, so it's whatever you want it to be, and the icon URL is again whatever you want it to be, and it's your local activation. Keep in mind that page help gives you very detailed information on oops, I have to show you that window, don't I? Yep. Sorry, just a minute. There is page help for all the taxonomy areas in the software, and it is very detailed. It does give detailed information on all the sections of the edit form and what they are for, what they should look like, okay, and whether or not they come automatically from InfoLine or can be edited by you, okay? So you do not have to remember what I tell you now. At any time while you are modifying the information, you can simply view the page help to review all of the details of each of the fields and what they are for. Any other questions on editing a taxonomy term? Okay, create works just the same way as edit. You get to the create screen through manage taxonomy. You can do create new taxonomy terms. There are forms for managing the source and facet values. Again, that list of facets is official. So although you could add new facets, technically speaking, you really don't want to. So that is an official list, and the way that those are assigned to records is done from the official list of facets. And finally, you have the ability to manage your related concepts. Those do have a code. They are either authorized or local, and there's no, other than the ability to add your own concept, there's no ability to rename an authorized concept. If you change the name, it would be reset automatically the next time that was updated. And that is taxonomy management. So, any further taxonomy questions before we move on to the thesaurus? Okay. The thesaurus will be a breeze compared to the taxonomy. Okay. The thesaurus, as I had indicated earlier, tends to be comprised of very general subjects and topics, which differs greatly from the very specific topics of the taxonomy. There are a few different types of publicly available searches for subjects. And in fact, other than in the management area, all of the ways that you search the thesaurus are available equally to both the to both staff and the public. However, there are sometimes some differences in the way those searches are displayed depending on how you have set up the view. Okay. So we have obviously a search by subject and keyword. So I can search just within the thesaurus part of the record. You'll notice that we have what we call the subject sidebar on our left hand here. All right. The subject sidebar uses any of the keywords that are entered from the basic or advanced search and attempts to match directly within the thesaurus. If it finds an exact match, it displays the exact term, the number of records that are using it, and all of the related information about that term. So it's the higher level terms, any narrower topics, any related topics, and any what are use references in the taxonomy we call use for, so alternate forms of the term. In addition, if it finds partial matches to the words that were entered, it will display those, but not in as much detail. If I click on one of those items, like child abuse, it would bring up all the records that match that particular subject. And the same would hold true with any of the items here. So if I click on family violence, it would show all of the items that match family violence. I'm going to do this in Hamilton now. The partial match is incredibly generous and is ordered in terms of what matches best to the terms that you enter. So I'll do a search for child abuse, and you'll notice that I did a words anywhere search, and it also brought up the subject sidebar. It will do that as long as the thesaurus is active in your view. It will bring up the subject sidebar for a words anywhere or a subject search. When I search child abuse, I get a tremendous number of partial matches because it's going to bring up any subjects that have either the word child or the word abuse. Pardon me, I'm going to change my display options to show the thesaurus instead of taxonomy. So you'll see I have things that have child or children, anything that has either any form of child, as in child or children or children, and any form of abuse. So women abuse, elder abuse. It's very, very generous. It does rank the results, but I mean the ranking is questionable. But if you're wondering why they're in random order, that's because that's what the database has decided is the best matches. I don't necessarily agree. So again, we have the broader term, related terms. You'll notice that with this particular search, we also have the ability to search with another term. That is because although we don't have the same kind of linking of subjects as we do with the linking of taxonomy terms, the thesaurus does have a structure within it that describes when two terms can be searched together as a compound term. So in this case, if someone was looking for child sexual abuse, they would be told to search child abuse and sexual assault together and to look for both those terms in a single record. And in this case, if I click on that, it's going to perform a search only for records that have both child abuse and sexual assault within the same record. Should really pick a cheerier topic.
We search fun.
I don't think we have a fun subject, so that won't work for me. We'll do child care. That's better. So you'll see again, child care is suggesting that I can search child care with the topic registries or with the topic schools. And if I clicked on either of these, like child care with registries, it's only going to bring up records that have both the subject child care and the subject registries. Okay, but they're not necessarily associated with one another because unlike the taxonomy, we don't currently have the facility to link two thesaurus terms together. That certainly was a feature that we had long considered adding to the software, but now that the taxonomy is in place, the chances that we're going to do any further work on improving the thesaurus is slim to none. So we can pretty much expect that we will never have linked thesaurus subjects at this point. So that is the main caveat here, that when you do compound searches with the thesaurus, those two terms aren't necessarily really associated with one another within the record. It just means they both exist in the record. It doesn't necessarily mean that child care and registries have anything to do with each other within that service. There are, just like we had the multiple subject, the multiple taxonomy fields, there are two kinds of subject, or three kinds of subject fields, pardon me. There is the subject field, which is what you see here, which is all of the subjects are linked and would perform a search for that particular subject. We have the subject no link field, which is the same content but not linked, so you couldn't perform a search. And we have the local subject field, which is the same as the subject field but contains only those terms that have been developed locally and are not part of the authorized set of terms that came from Inform Ontario. So besides the keyword search, we also have browse by subject. Depending on the settings that you have in your view, you may or may not see subjects that have a zero count. There is the ability to only show subjects that have records. If you set your view up to only show subjects with records, it's going to exclude any of the ones that don't actually have records associated with them, and that includes anything where we're doing alternate terms that suggest using a different term. Okay, so the list that you would see would be quite a lot smaller because it would only be showing you the terms that had the count next to them of greater than 0. All right, so many of the items that you see in this list here wouldn't be visible in a view that had been set up to block 0 subjects. For any of the cases where you see a use, that means that this is an unused term, an alternate form of a particular subject. So in the case of equipment, one of the alternate terms that is available is machinery, and it's saying if you want to search machinery, you should actually use the subject equipment. In some cases, you will see the word and or. For the case of marketing seminars, it says to use business promotion and seminars together within the same record. When we used the subject finder earlier for childcare, for example, we recall that it said for childcare registries, you should use childcare and registries together. If I click on childcare and registries, it once again does a search that only brings up records that have both the subject childcare and registries within the same record. Any questions about, oh, here's an or. In some cases, the suggestion for an unused term is one of 2 other possible terms. So in the case of censorship, it says to use either freedom of information or public morals offenses, depending on your point of view of what censorship is, I suppose. That these are 2 alternate terms that are possible uses in the place of the term censorship, which is not a term that you can actually add to a record. Okay? So that would be one or the other, rather than okay. Sorry about that. It just hung up on us. So that's the basics of browse by subject. You either have only a list, if you have 0 count off, you have only a list of the subjects that have terms associated with records. If you don't block 0, and terms that are in use, so you'll see everything. So those are the main kinds of searches we have for subjects. So basically we can do a keyword search here. We can do a browse by subject. And we also have the subject finder, which shows particular related terms and so on. If I did the child care, subject-based searches. In addition, we do have a subject finder tool, which is available from certain areas of the software. I'm going to go directly there, which is at my J. Subjfind.asp. This is a pop-up window that normally appears on your feedback forms and other areas of the software, but you can go to it directly as well, where I could also and work similarly in that I can just navigate around the thesaurus and see all of the different terms that are available and what the narrow and broader terms are, unused terms, and so on. Okay? So that's one tool that is available to you, and again, that will be available from things like feedback forms, update forms, and so on. Does anyone have any questions about searching using the thesaurus before I get into the updating the thesaurus?
So Kathy asks about the intention to discontinue the use of thesaurus once we switch to the taxonomy.
Right. So there is the ability to turn off the thesaurus within any given view. So if you want to stop using the thesaurus, you can remove it from any given view at any time. Whether or not people are ready to stop using the thesaurus is sort of up in the air, because I think a lot of people are still quite dependent on the thesaurus and still do like to use it. And in addition, we don't currently have any public searches that are as nice as, say, the subject sidebar. So we don't have, we really don't have a very polished public taxonomy search at this time. So a lot of people would just prefer to keep using the subject because it is very friendly to the public, and the taxonomy in a lot of ways is not very friendly to the public, and certainly the kinds of search that we have available to the public right now are not tremendously easy. It's not that they're not easy to use, it's that they're not tremendously useful compared to just your basic keyword search from the front page. So, people just may not be ready to do that. If we are looking at having a new version of the software within a couple of years, it may be that the thesaurus is not part of that redevelopment. It may only be the taxonomy. And if that is the case, then certainly we would hope to have more robust public tools available so that people would not miss the thesaurus the same way. But certainly there will continue to be support for the thesaurus within CIOC for at least 2 years. I cannot say beyond that, but for at least 2 years there will continue to be support within the software for the thesaurus. Okay, updating the the thesaurus is very simple. It's just done from your regular update record. It will provide you with a link of all of the existing terms that you have indexed to the record. It does distinguish between authorized subjects that were provided directly to you and local subjects, which are terms that you have created for local purposes that are not part of the standard set. Okay? But they're all added from the same form. So even though the software does distinguish between the two, they're all stored in the same place and they're all added in the same way from the same form. In order to add a new subject, you simply list the terms separated by a semicolon. Space doesn't matter, so I can do child care with a semicolon right after. Doesn't matter. If I pick terms that don't exist, and attempt to submit this record, so the record will process. However, you will get a warning: the update was not fully processed. Please review the subject terms below. If I go down, it will tell me that there was no term purple crayons in the thesaurus. I do have the option to add purple crayons as a local subject to the thesaurus. So doing this would actually create a new thesaurus entry marked as local for the term purple crayons. So please be thoughtful about this. And obviously your permissions do dictate whether or not you get the option to add purple crayons. You wouldn't necessarily have that option. I wanted to do another example. I'll use the word shift. Obviously, there's no subject term called shift, but there are subjects that begin with shift or have shift in them. So in this case, I'm given two options. I'm given the option to create a term called shift, but I'm also given a partial match, meaning there was a subject term found that had part of the term that I entered. How does it find that partial match? In the same way that it does a partial match in the subject finder. So that means it can match any one of the words, or if the word is short, or if the word is long, it will actually stem the word, meaning it will find children. If you search child, for an example, it does do partial word matching in word forms, so it is a very generous match. But obviously the preferred method, if you're not sure what subject to add, is to use the subject finder, which we saw earlier in a bigger form. So obviously the preferred method is for me to search for, if I want horses, is to search for horses, or horse. And it will show you the options that are available. So if I wanted to index horse racing, it tells me I should have horses and sports in that record. If I want to add horses, I can just add straight horses. I can get more information about any of the terms that I find. And when I'm done, I would simply copy the one that I wanted to add to my record and paste it into my Add New Subject, submit it, and that would add those subjects to my record. I'm not going to do that because I am using Inform Hamilton's database and I don't want to do any damage to their records. But that is a very simple process of adding subject terms to records. Obviously a far, far cry from the indexing process for the taxonomy. Are there any questions about indexing with the thesaurus? Okay, so now we'll talk about thesaurus management. The thesaurus management tool has a very robust search search form built into it, so you can do far more extensive searching of the thesaurus than you can do with, say, the subject finder. You can do keyword searches using multiple criteria. So I could say I want the keyword child and any of the terms care or the abuse, or there we go. So either child care or child abuse, what that would find, and I can search that. So it'll find anything with the word child and either care or abuse in it. Okay. You can do date searches, so when the term was created or modified, and the date searches work just like other date searches in the software. You can do search by source, so to differentiate between terms that were provided to you and terms that were for a local project. You could even have terms that were for many different kinds of projects. So even though this says ACICO and local, those sources are customizable by you. So if you specified that particular terms were sourced for a CCAC project and other terms were sort of general local terms, you could do that kind of distinction. You can say whether or not the term is authorized, so local versus authorized terms, whether or not the term is active, because what a lot of people don't realize is, yes, you can activate and inactivate thesaurus terms. You don't have to have all the thesaurus terms in the database. You can do activations in the thesaurus. You can search by term usage. Used terms are terms that can be assigned to records. Unused terms cannot be assigned to records. Those are alternate term forms. And used for another term means that, for example, we had seen that equipment was used for machinery. So that term is being used for some other term. There are categories in the thesaurus, so in a similar way to related concepts. These are very general umbrellas under which the terms are categorized. And you can search based on how many records are using that particular term. So if you wanted to find instances of subjects that really are not being used very much in your database, you could say, show me terms that are in use by at least one record, but no more than 3 records. And it would show you very rarely used subject terms, in particular ones that are only used once. You may, here we go. That's a very interesting thing to find. You can find some very interesting results when you do that kind of a search. And in this case, I would expect Hamilton's going to want to do something about that. So, and display full subject information will show incredibly detailed information about every single term that it matches. So let's go look at that archaeology that we found earlier. Okay, so we can see here that there is actually an authorized term for archaeology, and somebody has added a local term for archaeology. Okay, and obviously that is, they might want to change that. If there's a spelling issue where they want to have an alternate spelling, keep in mind that there are unused terms. So it is possible to have archaeology used for some other spelling of archaeology if that's what you need, rather than adding it as a separate local subject. Once you have the terms, you can actually go into the management of the term. So it brings up a form similar to what you saw in the taxonomy, where you can say whether or not the term is authorized, whether it's used. In this case, this is not an active term. Doesn't meet the criteria for being an active term. And you can specify if a term is being used for, you can specify if you want this term to be used, to use other terms instead. So one example, if I go to Manage Thesaurus, we saw that equipment was used for machinery, or machinery was used for equipment. I'll do this. Machinery, use equipment. So if I went into Manage Machinery, it would say use the following terms instead, equipment. Okay, so this is how I would manage the unused terms, which is quite different from the unused terms in the taxonomy, where you manage those within the terms they are used for. In the thesaurus, it's very different because you can have more than one alternate term to use instead. So in this case, I'm saying machinery, use equipment, but I may have other subjects that I could also direct this person to rather than just equipment. I could say use equipment, or I don't know, I can't think of another word for machinery. But you can pick some other potential subject that is appropriate as an alternate form of the term machinery. Your ability to activate or inactivate is to some degree dictated by whether or not that particular term is currently in use. You cannot inactivate a term, actually you cannot change the activation of a term that is in use, and that can end up in some strange circumstances if you do certain kinds of behind-the-scenes changes without having a proper activation. That generally only occurs when the database is first set up. But basically, you would not see the ability to inactivate this term if this term had been used in a record. Okay? If that happens, you will just see inactive no, and it would be impossible to inactivate it, as we had seen in the case of archaeology. This is an active record, and we cannot activate, we cannot change it. If I submit this, it'll actually turn to active. You cannot change it if it's not being used for, if it's being used for records. You cannot change the activation. So in this case, the only way to change the activation would actually be going and remove this term from the record. Okay? Any other questions about managing the thesaurus? Back to there's a question here about do we need permission to activate a term? I don't know whether that was about the thesaurus or the taxonomy, but in either case, the answer is no. Your activations are totally a local decision So whatever you need to do for your own local needs is really your call. The system will sometimes forbid you from making changes to your activations, as I just discussed, depending on what terms are currently being used by records, because obviously you cannot inactivate terms that are in use. But other than that, it really is a local decision how you manage your activations. There are no restrictions about the activations with the thesaurus the way that there are with the taxonomy. So you can really index at any level of the thesaurus, and that's fine. It doesn't matter if you do it at various different levels. You use whatever terms are appropriate for the particular record that you're indexing. So that's very you want to be consistent. So for the same kinds of records, you want to use the same kinds of subjects. However, there really isn't the same kind of restriction about levels that there is in the taxonomy. Okay, so next on my list and final on my list is going to be the North American Industry Classification System, which luckily is pretty simple because we don't have a lot of time. We're going to run till 4:15 and then we will be done. And I will give you an opportunity for general questions at the end. Sorry, I have one more question about the taxonomy I'll just answer before I get into it. What happens when we've activated at level 4 but the consolidation of provincial databases is activated at level 3? So currently, the provincial database basically activates everything so that they can accommodate whatever it is that you send them. Okay? But one of the desired features of the software is to have it automatically use, if there is a higher activated term, to automatically use that instead. So if I have indexed to a low level and I send it into a provincial database which activates at a higher level, it will simply roll up any of my terms into those higher level terms. Okay, so there certainly is the capacity to do that and the intention that that would be where we're going. But for now, CIOC software at least is okay with you activating at multiple levels and searching at multiple levels, and that isn't the case with all kinds of software. So there are certainly there are packages out there that don't let you do that and really can't accommodate for that kind of behavior because it certainly is not the preferred practice. They don't want you to activate at multiple levels, but CIOC was built to be able to tolerate it, meaning you still can do searches at multiple levels and cope with the fact that things are indexed differently, but for consistency's sake and for the best quality of searches, you really do want to have consistency when you bring those records together. And so there's two ways that we would be doing that. One is obviously talk to each other and as much as possible have everyone use the same levels. And the other is the feature that I'm talking about, which is when they import your records at the provincial level, it would automatically roll those up to the next highest level of activation. And that is the long-term way that we'll be dealing with that. Does that answer your question okay? Okay. On to NAICS. I'll be quick. We've only got about 15 minutes. The North American Industry Classification System, as I indicated earlier, is mainly intended to be used in databases that index at least some proportion of businesses. That isn't to say that you couldn't index your human services records with NAICS, but only that it is particularly useful to those of you who index businesses or who want to index businesses because neither of our other two classification systems does a good job of handling those records. NAICS is a very general and broad system that has very good and detailed coverage of all kinds of sectors of industry and services. So that is the condition under which you might be interested in using NAICS. And as I indicated earlier, the work effort involved in indexing with NAICS is much, much smaller than indexing with the taxonomy or the thesaurus. Wherever possible, you should only be adding one very specific NAICS code to every record. It is possible to add more than one, but your goal is always to add only one, and the most narrowest one that applies, the narrowest one that applies to that record. And for that reason, the churn in NAICS information is extremely low. Once you've classified a particular program, service, business, that code is likely to apply forever and never need to be updated, because the major type of service offered, or the sector in which that organization or business operates, does not tend to change. Even though their individual services might change, the sector in which they operate does not tend to change. So it really is a low-maintenance system in comparison to many other kinds of systems. In addition, it is a North American system that is used in many, many different fields and sectors. So it's used outside of the community information field and is used quite a lot within government. So depending on the kinds of projects you're working with, you may have, it may be very beneficial for you to be able to offer that kind of a classification to certain kinds of clients who are accessing your information. What does NAICS look like? It has a really similar structure to the taxonomy in that it's a code-based system where the code also represents a hierarchy. I've just popped up the NAICS code finder, and we'll just use the NAICS code finder for a minute here to explore what the system looks like. It is a hierarchical system. And at the top level, it is comprised of 2 digits in the same way the top level of the taxonomy system is a single letter, and as you go down, the code gets longer and longer, but the code also describes where that particular term falls within the hierarchy. So if I look at utilities, a narrower term is electric power generation. I can go down to transmission, control, and distribution, and so on, and keep going down, bulk transmission, and so on. So, and within each one, you can see where that falls within a larger sector. One of the things that you'll notice in NAICS that can be initially confusing is sometimes you will see the same term, if you will, the same name, at multiple levels of the hierarchy. That is because the levels actually mean something specific in NAICS, unlike the taxonomy where one branch might only go down to level 3 and another one could go down to level 6. Every single branch of NAICS goes down to level 6, every single one. They all terminate at level 6. And if there is nothing of fundamental change from one level to another, then it simply repeats the same name that it had at the previous level. And your goal, as I said earlier, is to always index at the lowest possible level. And wherever possible, that should be I think it's level 6. It's 6 digits. So wherever possible, you want to be using a 6-digit NAICS code, which is the lowest possible level that you can use. But you'll see cases where it's repeated at the top, like this, where the sector and subsector are really the same thing. There is no particular broad subsectors of the group utilities. The industry group, there is a branch where it breaks out from just utilities to show we have 3 different industry groups: water, sewage, and other systems, natural gas, and electric power. Those are the 3 industry groups. And if I go into those, it will show industry classifications, which is the next narrowest level, and within that, it has what they call the national industry. It says national industry because at that lowest level, that 6-digit level, is where there tends to be variation between the 3 countries that are involved in NAICS. So Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. Most of the variation between the naming and the structure at this lowest 6th level is at this lowest 6th level, and they call it the national industry level. Okay? And that's the level that wherever possible you want to index to your records, although you can use a broader level if that's what applies. one thing that's really important to be aware of with NAICS is that it's almost always plural. So you either always want to search the plural term, or you always want to search with a wildcard, pardon me, you always want to search with a wildcard to account for the fact that terms in NAICS use plural. So in this case, I did a search for the word computer in either the name or the description of the industry. If I wanted to be more specific and only show specifically ones that had it in the name, then I could have done that. In this case, I did name or description, which will obviously bring up more records. I can pick any one of these items, like, here we go. Computer peripheral, prepackaged software, etc., etc. I can take this low level and at any point move up to a higher level, more general description. The examples are also part of what is searched when we do a search anywhere. The examples indicate very specific activities that describe what this particular group or sector does. So in this case, it's computer software, computer peripheral equipment, wholesale. It's really, really specific activities so that you can really understand what that means. If I do a search for farming, for example, it's going to be very explicit about the kind of farming that is done. If I went into other grain farming, it would give specific examples of what falls into the classification of other, meaning things that aren't covered by other kinds of classifications. So I could literally do a search for barley farming and it would bring this term up and I would know to classify this under barley farming. So it is incredibly, incredibly specific, and you will be able to find most things quite easily by searching in name, description, and examples, because the examples are very, very detailed and explicit. If you have no idea where to start searching, that is the easiest thing is to search by keyword, or you can do a browse where you can go through the hierarchy to find things that apply. So if I was going to do hospitals, I would know that healthcare and social assistance is a likely place to find hospitals. And there it is, 622 hospitals. Under that, I'm going to find general hospitals, and under that, if I kept going down, I would find pediatric hospitals, where I could classify something like the McMaster Children's Hospital. So that is the basics of the system and the structure of the system. Each term has a very detailed description about what that particular term is used to classify. It has particular examples, and in some cases it has particular exclusions where it says that you're not supposed to use this term for a particular activity, but instead suggests another term that you should be using instead. The main search type, publicly available search type for the North American Industry Classification System is the browse. The browse is a hierarchical search. You can view any of the subcategories of the industries, or you can search at any level. So this works, again, very similarly to the way the browse by service category works, in that you can at any time view the subtopics, and it would show you the count for any of those subtopics. Or you can do a search, and it would search at that level and any subtopics as well. So if I look under healthcare and social assistance subcategories, I can see hospitals. There are 20 hospitals. If I look at subcategories, I can see that there are 12 general medical hospitals, 4 psychiatric and substance abuse, and so on. If I do subcategories of general medical, I know there are children's hospitals there. So if I go down, I can see there are 3 pediatric hospitals and 9 general hospitals. This search, again, is most effective if you are very careful to index at the lowest possible level and avoid indexing to more than one category, and really using only the one category that most accurately describes the major type of activity. And that's it. I can do a search in any one, and it brings it up. The process of adding NAICS codes to records is, again, very simple. From within the update records, You simply type in the 6-digit code. If possible, the 6-digit code. You can use less than 6 digits if you need to, and you can use multiple NAICS codes if you need to. You simply enter them separated by semicolon. If you click the NAICS code finder, it will pop up the little window that we looked at earlier where you can actually search for a code to figure out which one to use, and that's it. That is the entire process of indexing with NAICS. Where possible, you're just adding one code. Okay. Do we have any questions so far about NAICS? If you want NAICS, you need to make a request on the bulletin board if you don't already have it. I will add it. Again, it is free to use for any of our community information module members. I do have to load the data into your system, and then you are responsible for turning it on in any of the views in which you want to use it. One thing to keep in mind is the version that CIOC currently releases of NAICS is NAICS 2002. NAICS is released once every 5 years, so it was last released in 2007, and we do not issue the 2007 version. The changes from version to version are not tremendous. However, we don't have the 2007 version, and really unless there was a lot of motivation from the membership to go in and get the updates to 2007, we don't have any immediate plans to do so. 2002 is perfectly serviceable, and although we would like to upgrade, there's certainly no pressure on us to do that. If we do update to 2007, again, it would not update again until 2012, because it is exactly a once every 5 years that they do release this system. If you do want to see the difference between 2002 and 2007, you can get a link directly to the Statistics Canada information about NAICS from within the system. You just click on this, the link to NAICS, and it will give you a history of NAICS. And from within the Statistics Canada site, you can actually change the 2002 to 2007. In both cases. And that would give you all of the information about the 2007 system and potentially some of the changes between 2002 and 2007. There is a management system for NAICS. However, certainly this is not a system that you would be modifying. Although the software allows you to make modifications, so for instance, if you wanted to incorporate some of the changes from 2007 and you wanted to manually go in and do that, you could absolutely do that. But NAICS is a no-maintenance system, meaning you shouldn't need to be going in and adding anything or removing anything or activating, deactivating, changing. Although the system lets you do that, you shouldn't have to do that. That is not a normal practice that you should be doing. So, if you do want to, the NAICS management link is on the side menu there. You can use the code finder to find a particular code, enter the code, and edit it. To add a new code, you simply have it blank and hit View Edit Code. And when you're editing it, it's incredibly simple. You simply have the classification and description names. The international compatibility indicates whether they have that equivalent classification in those other countries. And for these 6-digit codes, so those lowest level codes, you may have a list of exclusions and examples. So it's very specific activities that industry would be taking, that industry would be engaged in. And that's it for NAICS. So we're open to general questions. Oh, someone asked if we fixed advanced search. Yeah, it was missing. The NAICS was missing from the advanced search form, and yes, it is there. The ability to search by a specific NAICS code in the advanced search form if you have it turned on. So, yeah. Any other questions about NAICS or any questions about any of the 3 classification systems? It's a lot to have thrown at you in one afternoon. So Gary had said this session didn't include searching by taxonomy in detail. I don't know what you mean. All I can explain to you, Gary, is how the tools work, which I covered all the different tools we have. In terms of the actual content or how you index your records, I can't help you with that. So there isn't any other training session planned because I've covered everything that I can cover. If you had a specific question about how to do something or where you wanted more clarification about how to do a particular task, I can certainly do my best to try and explain that.
The recordings of the first 3 training sessions are up at CIOC.info/training. There's a link to the training in a message that I posted late last week on the message board. So if you want a direct link, you'll find it there. I will put the recording from this training up as soon as I can get around to doing so, which may be as early as this evening. But the recordings from the first 3 training sessions are there, as well as the recording from the second client tracker training session. There is no recording for the first client tracker training session because I hadn't figured out how to do recording yet at the time. So I apologize for that. And the recordings for this and all of the training sessions in the future will be posted at the same place, which is CIOC.info/training.
Okay, anything else? Okay, well, if you think of something later after the training, as always, you can ask questions on the bulletin board. And in particular, if I do understand that it is really, really difficult to take the abstract concepts of how these tools work and figure out how to apply those to specific searching tasks. I totally get that, and that is part of why I clarified when I started the session that there were limits to what I was going to be able to cover today. But I am happy to try and help you solve particular problems. So if you want to post, if you don't know now the question to ask, but you want to post a question about, you know, this is the kind of record that I want to index and I don't know how to index it, I may not be able to answer you with a specific term, but someone else might be. If the question is, how do I use this search effectively? This is what I'm trying to look for. This is what I'm trying to do. I absolutely will do what I can to try and give you whatever help I can to use the tools effectively. But in terms of content, like which terms to pick, I can't help because, as I say, I know the system well, but I don't know the content of it. So I'm not the person to come to in terms of which term do I use. But I can certainly give you advice about where do I go to find out which term to use, or how do I use the tools to browse through the information or search for terms to effectively locate an appropriate term. That is where I can help you. Okay, and where I can't help you, where my knowledge drops off, which is the actual content, that's where your fellow members come in because they know the actual content. So even if I can't answer your question because it's too specific for me in terms of the content, someone else may be able to. So please do post. Please do. I think there is a special forum specifically about the taxonomy that you can visit to get advice on, you know, what levels to activate or which terms to use for certain records. Make use of those resources, absolutely.
So Lillian is saying that there is a taxonomy
Right, I think it's a Yahoo group or something like that. I don't visit it, so I don't know. But there absolutely is a specific group available for you to ask those kinds of questions, those data questions, which term do I use kind of questions.
If we identify, Lillian says that she knows the correct location for that. When we identify that, that's probably something that should be in the list of information at the top of the CIOC message board, and we will put the links up there.
Yep, absolutely. And we are looking to relaunch the CIOC members area in the new year, and we'll make sure that we do a good job of identifying those kinds of resources so they're easy for you to find. Okay, and if that's everything, then we'll sign off. And please do feel free to follow up later on the bulletin board if you think of something after the fact.